Hello. Sorry, Vicky. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see your faces. Welcome to Sheaf Poetry Festival in collaboration with Off the Shelf. We've got this lovely day planned. We've had a workshop this morning, and we've got 2 more events after this one. We'll tell you a bit more about those later. I'm Susanna Evans. I printed one of these out for both of us, so it just says I'm name, so that threw me. I'm Susanna Evans. I'm one of the creative directors of Sheaf Festival, and we're delighted to be bringing you these events today that we've put together to showcase what we think are some really interesting and vital and exciting themes in contemporary poetry. We'd like to thank Off the Shelf Festival and the Millennium Galleries for their support in bringing together the programme today. So this event is Writing the Now, which is exciting. So writing right now. Some people have already done some writing of the now this morning with Jacqueline. So, but that's now the past. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. So how do writers react and interpret global events in a fast-changing world? This event brings you 3 poets who have all written with immediacy in response to current issues. Jacqueline Saphra's 100 Lockdown Sonnets was written in real time as a sonnet a day for 100 days from the 23rd of March 2020, while Kate Fox's Oscillations explores isolation in the age of the pandemic through the lens of neurodiversity, and Arij Manuelpillai's improvised explosive device. Sorry, for some reason that's hard to read quickly, which is just coming out with Penned in the Margins, includes poems based on interviews and lots of research into various forms of extremism, and it's a very exciting book. So first up, I'm going to welcome Kate Fox to the stage. Kate is a poet based in Northern England who has made 2 comedy series for Radio 4 and written and performed numerous broadcast poetry commissions as a regular on The Verb on Radio 3 and Radio 4 Saturday Live. Her previous publications include We Are Not Stone in 2006, Fox Populi, I see what you did there, Smokestack in 2013, and Chronotopia in 2017. And this bio is out of date because, oh no, you have completed a PhD in performance from the University of Leeds, researching northernness and comedy. And her most recent book, The Oscillations, is from Nine Arches Press and came out, is it this time last year? It's a bit earlier, isn't it? Oh, okay, yeah. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Susanna. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. I gather the Sheaf Festival nearly didn't happen, like so many things. But then it did. Hurrah. It's happening right now. In the now. So I've always written quite a lot about and from the now in various ways. And so I've just tried to mix some of that up through the poems I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes. And I think some of my writing the now thing came because I originally trained as a radio journalist, and I literally, but I worked for commercial radio stations rather than the BBC, because their bulletins just lasted a minute and were really fast moving. And on my radio journalism course, we were played a BBC local bulletin, which was 3 minutes. And I just remember it as being so slow and about bins and things and the council. And then the commercial one was like, oh, yes, this, the world, everything, now, in a minute. It's done. And to me, it was like poetry. And I should maybe have been a bit more sensible and gone, what are the relative payment levels for commercial radio and the BBC? Because they're very different, actually. Basically, you started at 10 grand as a commercial radio journalist. I think you started much higher than that in the BBC. And you could have risen to become director of the BBC. But instead, I went off and became a poet. Anyway, I'll talk about that a bit more as we go along. But I'm going to start with a poem that was originally a now poem, and has continued to be a now poem. And sometimes when I think I'm writing a topical poem, it doesn't last very long. And sometimes it can, if it's more about a mood. This is about the mood of apocalypse that pervades everything. And I contend that we will cope better with the end of the world. We have coped better with the end of the world here in the north because we make less of a fuss. Although I do think we sometimes make a bit of a fuss about how we don't make a fuss. And it's really satisfying for me to do this poem in Sheffield, the home of the most scary film ever made about the end of the world, Threads. Sorry to mention Threads, if that's now going to lead to terrible flashbacks for some of you. The milk bottle melting on the doorstep. If you've never seen it and you are not of a fearful disposition, you must see it. Anyway, crack on with the poem. I'm going to put my tea down. It's a very casual thing. Right. Oh, I'm even going to do it properly on the thing. Right. Our end's in the north. On the first day the world ended, I said, least said, soonest mended. Sometimes these things are sent to try us, though in this case they'd been sent to fry us. On the second day, I was on the bus when there was a bang and all the lights went out and a chorus of, call this an apocalypse, I felt nought. And Grimsby hasn't looked this good since the Germans redecorated. Us northerners are tough like that. Nobody else compares. On the third day, there was a crack in the Tyne Bridge fell into a crack in the space-time continuum. I said, I'll go to the foot of our stairs. But when I got home, there weren't any. On the fourth day, Cleckheaton exploded. I said, worse things happen at sea, and popped on a Bear Grylls DVD. On the fifth day, the government said that actually in London, all the restaurants were still full, and maybe we weren't trying hard enough in Liverpool, Sheffield and Hull. We should get on our bikes, and there not being any roads left or bikes was just an excuse. On the sixth day, the streets were full of folk wandering around mourning. Not zombies, just people complaining about the price of white sliced and petrol. Greg's ham and Armageddon pasties were going down a storm, and they didn't have to charge tax because the surface radiation kept them warm, ambient temperature. On the seventh day, there were no planes in the sky. We had street parties, shared the last of our tins. Best china was brought out, bunting unfurled. Armageddon, we said, what's the problem? It's not the end of the world. Thank you. Okay, so I am now going to do a poem that when I wrote it, I said, and I meant this, that I was only going to perform it once, and then I said this a bit over dramatically, I was going to burn it. Forgetting that it's like as if the only copy of a poem nowadays is on a piece of paper and not like on my computer and on someone's phone if they'd recorded it. But the reason I said it was, basically, I was not going to write a poem after the death of the Queen. There's not going to be a thing. BBC Newcastle got in touch, were like, would you maybe like to write a poem for the day of the Queen's funeral? And I was like, no. In the past, I used to write anything about anything for anyone, but this was a very big, no way, Jose. Whatever tone you would need me to adopt, I am not going to be able to do that. Don't do it, not going to do it, not a thing, not a thing. And then, but it kicked off something in my brain. I was like, well, actually, and I knew I had a gig coming up at the Morecambe Poetry Festival that weekend. And I thought, I do want to try say something, even though this is a really hard topic, because the people that I spoke to were divided between either unexpectedly feeling feelings or not feeling feelings and feeling very cross that everyone else was feeling feelings. And I felt a bit in the middle of all that. And I did think maybe there is something. So I wrote this. I'm going to put these down. Right. It's called Obituary Alarm, and it goes back to my journalism days. I messaged my journalist friend to say I hoped their obituary alarm was working. It was part of all our lives as young newsroom workers in the 90s, the weekly test, the inevitability of a royal death, an in-joke, part of how we knew things before other people, compensation for our 10 grand starter salaries, the promise of future power, how the Queen Mother died on an Easter Saturday. which meant somebody didn't activate the orbit alarm, so automatic sombre programming didn't kick in, and one station played out of the bulletin announcing her death with the Lars song, There She Goes. And another played out with Emma Bunton's What Took You So Long? True story. My friend said she thought the Queen would make it through. I said I was in Hull when Michael Jackson died, which is how I always knew it was 2009 in quizzes. And I was in Hull for a gig now, just saying. Later, she messaged to say, don't go to Hull again. Someone said I should, but with a target in mind. They suggested Jacob Rees-Mogg. Though I could really only think Vladimir Putin worth the psychic death rays. A woman came into the bookshop. Basically, I've not really said this. I was doing a gig in a bookshop in Hull on the day the Queen died. A woman comes into the bookshop and says the Queen has now died. Dying, I correct her, because we'd only just checked. But now it really is died, and something like hysteria kicks in at a room full of people coming to an event already postponed for the Jubilee, bringing their jumbled thoughts and feelings with them. And my friend says, try not to say anything funny. I can only think of Michael Jackson in Hull and the disaster with the Queen Mother's obituary song, and somehow, in the hysteria, I say we should play The Queen is Dead by the Smiths. And we giggle like we're in a school assembly and know we have half an hour before the audience come, and feelings are fizzing out of us, and they sell that CD. So Shane unwraps the cellophane and puts it on, and I'm actually not that familiar with that particular song, but this feels very cathartic and we almost dance a bit. Something about it being factual and a prediction and a description of what's happening now, a right thing in an upended world, and some joyful distance. And then 2 audience members come early, and I say that we haven't cancelled the gig even though the Queen's died. Did they know? She has anyway. And one of the women starts to cry, says, oh, I didn't know I'd feel like this, and I feel bad about the strains of Morrissey still behind us, and hope she doesn't know the song. It seems like she doesn't. Our catharsis would be her mocking. I adjust to each entering audience member's mood, and when it finally comes to getting on stage, I say that I think bookshops and book gigs are the best sort of spaces to bring all your feelings and none, the ones that have surprised you or bubbled up then back down or just aren't there even though you think they should be, or see everyone else having, the ones that are really mainly about your gran or the pandemic or your mum or your fear of change, how in the last few years everything's been strange. The feelings that don't accord with your own political views, the ones you resent feeling forced to have by black tie readers of the news, the ones that choke in your throat unexpectedly when you watch the Paddington video. And it's normal to get drawn into the human story. It doesn't mean you've become a Tory. I even feel a bit sorry at that moment for Liz Truss while joking about how she killed the Queen, then furious at how she used her death as an energy crisis fracking ban reversal smokescreen. But then you have to pull back and take a telescopic view. I also want to stand in lines holding a blank page, have a police officer ask me what's on it so I can say my powerless, my confusion, my rage. Don't you feel them too? I'll write instead and speak just this once, twice, tracking across the white page to say, I hope we can all find a safe place to express the truth of all our reactions, not be laughed at or arrested or unheard or deterred from whatever they are, told to forced or falsed or a betrayal, these vulnerable parts of ourselves that bubble up from the heart's core, our confused mind. Just remember, we're all different. Be kind. Tread softly when you tread upon our beliefs. Tread softly when you tread upon our griefs. So that was that. Second time only. Thank you. And I suppose that kind of spewing, outpouring reaction to the news type poem, I quite like doing that uncrafted and sort of unfinished in some ways, and then finding there's a shape to it. That's one of the nice things about a topical poem, I suppose. But some of them I therefore end up adding in more structure, maybe in the form of just rhyme or repetition, to say, look, it's a poem that exists, even though I just wrote it now, and gave it out into the world 3 hours after it was written. I'm quite interested in how people value things that are written quickly, less than things that are written slowly. And I don't think automatically quick is less good than slow. But that's because my brain's always just going vroom, like that all the time. So I was poet in residence for the Glastonbury Festival. A lot of my now poems are also place poems and event poems. It was very surreal being a poet at Glastonbury, not my natural habitat. I don't really like big crowds, which is good normally, being a poet, or camping. Or the Rolling Stones, and they were headlining the year that I was on the Rolling Stones. And Mick Jagger was about to come down in his helicopter and start spending time in his yurt, where he was apparently going to stay. I was told that by John Humphreys of the Today programme, where I had to do a poem, but he said that he'd heard that Mick Jagger was going to be staying in a yoghurt, and his producer gently corrected him. I think you mean a yurt, John, a yurt. So that gave me the topic for that afternoon's poem. I had to write 2 poems a day at Glastonbury. So I didn't do any, at Glastonbury, didn't take any drugs, didn't drink, didn't stay up till dawn in a stone circle, dancing naked, painting myself with chicken entrails. I just wrote poems, basically, which is why that I think that painting yourself with chicken entrails at Glastonbury might be a thing. It's probably not a thing. Mick Jagger's Yurt. If you let that ring, it could be a beautiful accompaniment. I know you're trying to stop it. It's all right. We'll pretend we can't see or hear your terrible struggle that is unfolding in front of us. We're all glad it's not us. I'm not sure I've even turned mine off. Is it off? If you changed it, it's all right. It's all right. If you changed it to a Rolling Stones theme, we could totally have it underneath. You know, I can't get no satisfaction. It's all right. You're all right. See what I like? That's poetry of now, to me. The chaos of a ringtone. Right, Mick Jagger's Yurt. I'm going to, just because... You can watch Glasgow on a plasma telly, the steaming showers if things get smelly, and not a single speck of dirt in Mick Jagger's Yurt. There's a chef, a pool, a helipad, a jester on hand if he gets sad, and supermodels fight to flirt in Mick Jagger's Yurt. A string quartet lulls him to sleep, a jumper's woven from his personal sheep. The security guards are never curt in Mick Jagger's Yurt. There's a diamond-studded ceiling, a dodo feather quilt, a secret tunnel to Martinique has been especially built. Noble gases remain inert in Mick Jagger's Yurt. As 6G signals pumped in by hand, the air so pure your lungs expand. Keith Richards' lumbago does not hurt in Mick Jagger's Yurt. It's not ordinary life he's trying to dodge, it's just Glastonbury's not got a travel lodge, and even Bono would sell his shirt to stay in Mick Jagger's Yurt. Thank you. Well, good. In the olden days, when I did a lot of gigs, I don't anymore because the times are still weird, I would, if I was wearing something unusual or my hair was odd, I would comment on it because I'd think, oh yeah, remember that the audience will have a thought about that and you should address the thought, because part of the now is addressing whatever thoughts are in the room, and I forgot to do that. So this isn't, I don't know what to say about this. This is a nice jumpsuit. I'm liking this jumpsuit. It's not a Halloween costume. It's my actual clothes. So I used to say something about being like, but this was when my hair was more coloured, being like My Little Pony, The Wilderness Years. That was a line I used to have. I think that could still apply. And something about Grace and Perry. It was quite nice not having to think about my external persona during the lockdowns. I mostly hated the lockdowns, although they were equal parts healing and wounding. And I was due to have my poetry collection for 9 Arches sort of submitted by the July of 2020. And Jane from Nine Arches said, I think we're going to have to kind of push it back to November, maybe even the following February. And I said, well, I could be writing some poems then. I am writing poems. And then this sequence became pandemic poems. And I didn't, partly, I couldn't have written about anything else. To me, it was all there was. I couldn't escape it mentally or physically, as all of us couldn't. And I didn't want to. I also knew that I would forget what it felt like. The weirdness, the sheer weirdness of it would be forgotten. And I didn't want to forget. I do want to forget now. I am now in a time where I'm like, that was all very weird, let's just move on. And I'm sure that will oscillate back and forth as a feeling. Sometimes I want to, I'm sure some of you were like, oh, for God's sake, the lockdown, we're over. And some of you were like, oh, thank God, we're remembering. It'll shift, because it was... That's the nature of memory, I suppose, isn't it? This is called Breathe, because everything felt it was about breath. 1, 2, 3. Be mindful, they say. If your epithelial cells are under attack, just breathe. You can be whoever you want to be, they say. Despite the death of industry, expel the coal and metal dust from your lungs, just breathe. We are all equal. We are all free, they say. Even with a knee on your neck, just breathe. The sea and the trees unclog in this pause, open to the sky to just breathe. 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 My phone. Oh, see, I went on too much in the middle. I knew I would. I used to do that all the time. So that gives me 2 minutes for 4 poems. So I'm not going to do them at super speed. I'm going to do a slightly shorter poem from lovely cover in it, The Oscillations. I would totally buy this just for the lovely cover. Also the excellent poems inside, obviously. Actually, not that one. Not... Oh, I know, but that's even taking into account the lateness. Yeah, I'm good at that. I always think timing's my response. Thank you, though. I could have just said, yeah, we'll crack on forever. And now I am stalling. Okay, this is called The Distance. Anyone else get worried watching people on telly standing too close together, they ask? People want an explanation of how quickly this distance became their new lens. We're wired to notice what is dangerous and therefore important. I don't have a new instant overlay for the world, though. Now spiky virus cells circulate like planets. I was always clumsy and elliptical, unsure of the correct orbits. How close was too close? How far too far? I fix instead on another left glove on a branch, singular as a vernal star. And I'm going to end with a poem that I was commissioned to write by the Great North Run, the world's biggest half marathon. And it was for their 40th anniversary. They'd missed a year because of COVID, then they did the 40th. And I ended up, and they wanted me to include some sort of mention of the pandemic and its effects. And I ended up trying to summarise my whole lockdown. It's called This Run Is For You. The doorstep clappers, the calm, the flappers, the delivery drivers, the solitude thrivers, the banana bread bakers, the sourdough makers, those who kept their distance and those who went too far, those who built their strength, relationships, some Lego a bar, those who felt their whole lives collapse, those who healed, those relapsed. This one is for you. The handholders, doctors, nurses, indefatigable carers, the new dog owners, the lost aloners, the social media sharers, the duvet coat wearers, the toilet roll hoarders, the new wild swimmers and paddle boarders, The first-time Zoomers, the Euro-muters, the repairers of bodies and computers, the unsung NHS and supermarket staff, the ones who said, you've got to laugh, the ones who thought it was like flu, the ones who did not make it through. This run is for you. The folk who built cairns on Whitley Bay Beach, those who travelled deserted streets to teach, those who shouted at the daily briefing, those who let their sadness out, those who kept their grief in, the food bank givers and receivers, the conspiracy theorists, the news believers, the box step bingers, the stoics, the whingers, the DIY dyers, the self-cutting fringers, the ventilated, medicated, vaccinated, the pickers and the packers, the ushers, marshals, volunteers, undertakers, volunteer jabbers, the radio presenters who kept us company through that endless night, my 44-year-old friend Lisa, who was taken far too soon, my 84-year-old stepmum Rosemary, who went when the time was right, those who stared at quiet roads, their phone, their love, the moon. The pebble painters, rainbow displayers, daily walkers, Animal Crossing players, the homeschoolers with those endless worksheets, the emulators of Captain Tom's endurance feats, the pavement cyclists, the huffing joggers, the involuntarily celibate, the illicit snoggers, the rule benders, the rule keepers, the weird dreamers, the restless sleepers, the I'm just holding inner screamers, the shielding stuck, the quarantiners, those who knew that this would pass, those who felt it was forever, those miles, those endless miles. We got through them together. This one is for you. Thank you very much. See you at the end bit. Thank you.
Thanks. That was so good. I like a set that starts with the end of the world, because where can you go from there? I'm not originally from Sheffield, and when I moved here, I felt I had to see Threads, and it has scarred me for life. In fact, I stopped halfway through, and we had to think about whether we could go on with it, but then we did. So I recommend it, sort of. Right, wonderful. Arij Manuelpillai is a poet, performer and creative facilitator based in London. His poetry has appeared in magazines including Poetry Wales, The Rialto and Bath Mag, and his debut pamphlet Mutton Rolls was published with Outspoken Press. He's a member of Malika's Poetry Kitchen and London Stanza, received an Arts Council award to develop his creative practice, which I'm guessing resulted in this book, Improvised Explosive Device, which is published by Penned in the Margins. Please welcome Arij.
Thanks for doing that, I appreciate it. Hi everyone, how you doing? Thank you, Kate, for sharing those brilliant poems. I'm really happy to be here to promote this new book. It's like my first book. Wow! So I'm going around and speaking about it. And I'm happy to be at this event talking about the now, because as part of this book, I interviewed loads of people who are affected by radicalization and extremism. I was interested in all the steps that it took for someone to go from being who we think of as being a normal person to being someone who could come through with a radical act of terror. And with that, I spoke to people from the Tamil Tigers to the EDL to the National Front to radical left groups. And then I used those as inspiration for the book. It started off as sort of like a flight of fancy, speaking to my auntie, because my family's from Sri Lanka originally. And in Sri Lanka, if you might not know, there was a very famous group called the Tamil Tigers, or the LTTE. And they were famous a lot because they really coined the term, the suicide bomber with the suicide vest. And during that time, because my family are Tamil, they were on the run a lot at that time in Sri Lanka. So early on in the process, I talked to my auntie and I said, I'm writing this book. And she was like, yeah, I was on the run during 82. And I often said to my husband, if they managed to get hold of my kids, then I would be willing to do anything that it took for revenge. So I wrote this poem. It's called Salad. Salad. My auntie cuts the cucumbers slender as the tissue on the inside of a cheek. If you're gonna go, she tells me, wouldn't you rather go in style? A firework, an explosion, a man setting himself on fire outside the parliament. He made his dying into a kind of bouquet. No one wants to go without a fight, just backed into a corner. It's a matter of considering the options, she says, scraping in the tomato. Who to call, where to go, how it feels pressed snug to a breast. The supermarket, the approximate distance from the entrance to the aisle, where the eggs meet the bread counter, how a button feels below the weight of a thumb. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you my family seated for lunch. Auntie laughing about the buttering of my bread. It feels like I am seeing her for the very first time. Thank you. So I'm going to do something unexpected, which is that I haven't done this before, but basically I've got a lot of the interviews, like snippets of them. After I'd spoken to my auntie, I went and spoke to an uncle of mine. He fought for many years in the LTTE, and so I've got little snippets. This is him talking about his time at the LTTE. During that time, he lost a good friend of his. He watched his friend be shot, and he couldn't go and help him. So he watched in slow motion over a period of 5 days how his friend decomposing within sort of like a no man's land of the war zone. So this is him speaking.
I think when I went to the with the LTT, I was a teenager. I was a bit older than I think I was about 20 years old or 21 years old. I can't remember.
Okay.
But now, still, when I think about it, why did I join that moment? It's nothing to do with the situation what happened there, or yeah, it has some influence on it. But my main problem is the struggle at home, right? So my father was very strict person, and even my brother is very strict with me. He's my eldest brother. Even my brother-in-law also kind of, it's just that it's like a regime, kind of thing at home. So, and also I never had an opportunity to do what I really wanted to do, right? So that's why my rebellious thing come up. So I've become a rebel since I was a teenager. So, I wanted to act. They never let me act. I wanted to play football. They never let me play football. So I wanted to play cricket. They never let me play cricket because they wanted me to study. That's it. They just want me to study, study, study. So this is where my rebellious thing come up. So once I become rebellious, and there was one, all these boys started joining movements and 1983 riots, and we kind of, the youngsters, when we talking, we kind of come to a conclusion that probably we're not going to gain anything by, studying and going to work, which is not going to happen. That's what we thought, because I think the 83 riots had an impact as well.
While trying the creme brulee, my uncle joined the Tamil Tigers because he wanted to be an actor. His father wouldn't allow it, the acting, I mean. Uncle ran, bag-handed, snuck loose in a clapped-out truck, dumb enough to want a gun, young enough not to know where to point it. Today, at dinner, we go from cricket to bomb shelters, uncover a dimple in a shoulder blade, the tail of a bullet that made itself at home, now banter for airport staff, a keepsake, memento, something to squeeze and laugh, to remind him of his late friend who used to roll cigs in bread paper. Big as a building he was, neither low nor fast enough and too heavy to carry. He left him there, watched him for hours or days through a crack in a wall breaking. The body jerked like it was remembering what it wanted to say. When my uncle returned to tell the family, he didn't speak a word. The mother fell slack as if someone had pulled away her spine. My uncle on the doorstep, silently squeezing his shoulder to tears. Thank you. Great. So I found that a lot. A lot of people. A sociologist that I spoke to, she said, you know how you go to a Take That reunion gig? Back in the day, like loads of people loved Take That. Everybody was a big fan. They bought all the merchandise and everything like that. And then a few years later, most of the people had dropped off, but a few people still loved them. And you go 20 years ahead, and they still love Take That. And she said that's how it is with a lot of radical groups. People go through phases, and a lot of people drop out of those phases, but some people keep on. And unless we're able to discuss those problems with them or discuss those mindsets with them, they can be stuck within that trail of thought. And that was common with most of the people I spoke to. This is a conversation, came out of a conversation that I had with an English Defence League member. Two of them were at a march. They were the best of friends, and I loved how much love they had amongst each other. This is called I Love You, Man. There is always so much violence when we are together, because there is so much togetherness after the violence. In the pink of victory, our wounds make eyes in the dark. Eyes find podiums in our mouths. Scars write bios on our bodies. Look at him lick the laughter from my cuts. These tales of anthems belted out in the somber streets of 3 a.m. A snap at a bollard. A woman runs scared. A curtain snatched. A bus stop. Shrapnel. There is so much hope in togetherness. In stringing voices up, swinging fists high enough to punch the moon from the sky. We smoke on a stoop on the slabs of my dad's old market stall. He wants to thank me for kicking that kid so hard he didn't kick back, but settles for calling me a crazy fucker. It's nothing, I say. I love you like the weight of my boot in the face of that cunt. There is always so much love when we are together. Thank you. Great. I think I'm going to share this little one here. I spoke to this guy called Ivan Humble, who's an amazing guy, because I spoke to a lot of people who were within the EDL or National Front Now or other right-wing organizations, but this guy had been transformed over a period of time. And he was a really inspiring guy because of how open he was at talking to me. So much so at the end, he was like, oh, me and you could be friends, you know, in another life. And I thought, maybe, yeah. But then when I really thought about it, I thought, probably not. Thankfully, we're over Zoom. But he was a lovely guy. And he spoke a story, which I'm going to share with you now. And it made me think about being young in a shop near my school. And the shopkeeper asking me, oh, can you empty out your pockets? Because I saw you put something inside it. And me being, I hadn't put anything inside my pockets. I was like, no. And then he's like, empty out your pockets. So finally I did. I didn't have anything. And then the guy threw us out. And then I came back afterwards and I took tuna and I basically fucked up his shot. And I was really interested in the parallels between that story and the story that Ivan tells right now.
Yeah, so you were going down there with that mentality of we were going to fight, or were you just going down there?
We honestly, we were going down there just to protest. I think we did have a point when we started, but then it just got lost along the way. Do you know what I mean? With everything, because once we were anti-Muslim 100%, do you know what I mean? But when you're labelled far right and Nazis and that, it kind of rubs off on you.
Yeah, how does it?
It doesn't turn you into a Nazi, but what it does, it annoys you to the point that you might be at a demo. I've seen it happen. So I mean, you're at a demo until you shout Nazi at you. And somebody will put a Nazi salute up. Not because they're Nazi, because you're going to call me up, I'll act on it.
Yeah, I know. That's really interesting, isn't it?
I've seen it done and I've done it myself, because when you're in a town that you don't know, you're defensive anyway, do you know what I mean? People call you, when you've got groups of people who surround you, if you're in a group of 3 or 4 people, you'll get surrounded by groups of 10 or 15 and they're all shouting at you. So it kind of forces you to live up to the label a little bit. Because they're annoying you, you do that to annoy them back.
Yeah.
And then that's when the media seems to take the picture and portrays it as hundreds of Nazis on them. And
Ways of being heard. I did what anyone would, marched until my throat ached, until I realized violence was the language of negotiation. What choice do we have when our voices are quieter than Britney Spears walking her dog up the Strand? Can't you see the poetry in throwing a fire extinguisher through the window of the Ritz? Mindless, they say, but the city can burn so beautifully loud if you let it. You ever had a shopkeeper grip you like Gatorade, tell you to empty your pockets? I was only 14. I opened my mouth to shout, but soil came spilling out. Piano black from every orifice. There's no use crying. Some things are hard to say. Here's a flip book of words. Anarchists, fairies, woke militants, Tories. Does it hurt yet? Next time, in the shop, I pocket a handful of bonbons, fork tuna behind the birthday cards, thugs, hoodlums, yobs, scum. A man is on a march in Rotherham, tells me being labelled Nazi hurts like hot poker. All that soil in his esophagus. He reaches his hand out. It's not what he believes, it's what he knows will hurt. Clamps his fingertips together, stretches them towards the sun. Maybe just 2 more, if that's okay. Yeah, great. So a lot of the book was about capturing violence, and a lot of the stories that I heard were immensely graphic, and it made me really interested in how violence lives in the body, and how even from past generations, we're passing that through to our next generation. We've normalized violence on TV so much. As part of the research, I watched a lot of videos and learned a lot about how ISIS and the Taliban were using styles and movie filming techniques to create this fear. And this was based on a video of a person being run over super slowly with a tank. It was like a eye for an eye thing. And it comes with a epigraph, which is like a warning. Warning, very graphic. Islamic State runs over Syrian man with a tank, crushing his head like a prune. Tank. Soon after we check, our limbs are still attached. We watch a man driven over by a tank and wonder how it feels to have your body crushed so slowly you hear each bone shift in the skin like peeling white tape from the pavement. When would you black out at kneecap, groin, heart, the lip of the wheels, caterpillar, nonchalant over the tip of your chin like the feeling of a tumor growing at an alarming rate? Incidentally, a tumor is growing at an alarming rate. You thought it was a way away for someone else, but these things, they get in the limbs, start running into schools, and the teacher rings a special alarm, so the children dive trembling under their desks. We've mastered the art of imagining our deaths. We hire camera crews to help us do it, lining up the cement blocks, placing our heads between our knees, and... Thanks very much. Great. Thanks for being such a wonderful audience. I hope I didn't bring the mood too far down. I felt like watching Kate. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to rain on this parade. I learned a lot about grooming, how young people are groomed. Sometimes by people online, other times by almost like themselves, because Twitter or TikTok or any of those sort of reels, they work on algorithms. At one point, YouTube was only 5 videos away from extreme radical videos. So on TikTok, you click like, you just liked one slightly racist video, and then it just sort of tailed into showing you stuff and normalizing those mindsets. So I wrote this with the mindset of how people are anti-refugee. I used butterflies as a metaphor. Let's just call them butterflies. A boy, barely man, barely lucid, been barely outside in weeks, hocked up in laptop light like a train's perpetually passing by. A boy, barely man, nurturing an unhealthy obsession for butterflies, the way the wings flicker like God is nudge, nudge, wink, wink. The way its caterpillar transformed, super slow-mo, saying, look, I'm so delicately precious. How quickly it veers to creating a kind of chaos. Here are the facts. Not in education or training. Problems making friends, socially awkward. The next video will play in 5, 4, 3. You have to look for butterflies not in motion, just sat there. Delicate as stigma, sipping honeydew nectar. Raise the net very slightly. No sudden movements, and 100 or so videos of butterflies being slammed on sills, each clips a droplet of honey, each droplet curiously closer to a pair of tweezers cold against the wing snap. If you like what you see, click subscribe. Rare butterfly washes up in Dover. Butterfly plague, the truth about butterfly. Killing a butterfly is easy. It isn't long before he cannot stop seeing it there, in the space above the desk, dead. The centerpiece of a bedroom, framed. Every morning, he'll wake up and say, I did it. I fucking got you. Thank you so much, everybody.
It's okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jess. Thank you, Arij. That was amazing. It's a fantastic book. Those poems really, it's sort of magic. Well, I'm sure it's not magic. It's very carefully worked out. But the way you manage to put us into empathy with all sorts of different, very extreme viewpoints. It's really clever. Thank you. So, our final reader, Jacqueline Saphra, is a poet, playwright, teacher and activist. Her collections include All My Mad Mothers, shortlisted for the 2017 T.S. Eliot Prize, Dad, Remember You Are Dead, and 100 Lockdown Sonnets. It's like 2 titles running into each other. And A Bargain with the Light, Poems After Lee Miller, which they were both published in 2020. Please welcome Jacqueline to the stage.
Hello. I sort of feel like we all need to take a moment. Really. No, don't say sorry. I mean, it's just, it's both of you, I think, were very powerful in very different ways. And I think there are a lot of resonances all round. So I think it's very interesting programming that you've done. Very interesting. So, or maybe I just need to take a moment. So I'm going to do a kind of sandwich. So I'm going to start with some poems from 100 Lockdown Sonnets, and then I'm going to read a few, scarily read a few new poems from my forthcoming collection, and then I'm going to read a couple more sonnets as well. So I wrote this book, 100 Lockdown Sonnets, not intending to write a book, really. I just thought I needed to do something when the first lockdown started to sort of keep myself sane, really. And so this is what I did. And it really did keep me sane, because it gave me something to do that felt constructive. And mostly the poems were in response to various things I'd read in the newspaper. So this is Sonnet 3 from the 25th of March, 2020. Gather myself, right? The headline is BBC News quotes Trump. Trump says the US is beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. 25th of March, 2020. And this is about a walk I took with my daughter, who's living on the other side of London. Alas, there is no plan, there are no eggs, no bread. Compassion's nearly out of stock, but we can walk together in the park, keeping our distance. Spring is here. She bends her spine towards the light and takes her place amid the joy of things. She will not stop her rhymes of blossoms reaching out and up towards the sun. She will not slow her pace towards full frontal ecstasy. She knows only one way to hold this world. Our pain is not her pain. We must move on, stay close without touching, share the climbing light of day, build our wall of faith against the flood, and try to talk of other things, like love. Ooh. It's very nice that you're clapping between each poem, but they're quite short, so it might get a bit tiring. But please carry on, it's really nice. This was in response to a video of some drones over the island, Hart Island, which is in New York. And this is really a poem about the people who were homeless or poor or dispossessed, and who died of COVID, I suppose, but it's also about just people who don't have anyone to love them. Sonnet 20 from the 11th of April, 2020. And Reuters say, New York City officials have hired contract labourers to bury the dead in its potter's field on Hart Island. The men are digging trenches. The drones are on the move, filming, marking the day. New graves to hold the homeless bones of the diseased, unloved, unknown, unclaimed. The dead are wrapped in body bags, then placed inside the coffins, names scrawled on the lids. The men for hire stack up the bodies, laid in rows 3 deep. Earth will cover this the way she always has. The plague has come again. The mother of us all cradles her dead and weeps. We cannot feel it. Wrapped in the hum of drones, we hover, doubting overhead. Surely that toy town island can't be real. It's men in yellow, black earth, charnel fields. I know, I feel like I'm reliving the whole thing again every time I read these sonnets. Honestly, I get all those feelings again. It's like, how many times do I have to read these sonnets before I can exorcise all this stuff? This one's a bit more cheery. This is, well, I say cheery. You probably all remember that video of Deborah Birx watching while Donald Trump said that if we all ate disinfectant, we would all be fine and get better. And also, the name Birx, right? My first thought was, what else rhymes with Birx? So, well, you'll hear what else rhymes with Burks. So, this is Sonnet 33 from the 24th of April 2020. Coronavirus response, Chief Dr. Deborah Birx looks stunned as Trump suggests injecting disinfectant. That was from The Independent. The president has shamed you where it hurts in public. Why so quiet, Dr. Birx? You've lasted years, you do it for the perks, but now the blessing has become the curse. You've learned to tolerate his kinks and quirks, to feed ambition or a thirsty purse, but do you really love him, Dr. Birx? Your sycophantic soul still flirts with fame, but suddenly you're risk-averse. Your eyes deny, you fudge the facts. What's worse, the camera has caught you, Dr. Birx. You try a range of faces. Nothing works. Behind this viral joke, the terror lurks. Still, you say nothing. Nothing, Dr. Birx. And I actually read about her. She left the advising the government, and she went on to some sort of weird air freshener company that said they could rid the air of the virus, and they were inventing some sort of machine to do that. Are you all right? You're all being very, very quiet. Oh dear, this is another one that's a bit grim. Sorry. So this is Sonnet 34. It's from the 25th of April 2020. The Guardian says, Ecuador, cardboard coffins distributed amid coronavirus fears. The brokers love a long-stemmed rose, fated, big-bloomed icon of romance, plastic-sleeved, then packed in cardboard boxes air-freighted from Ecuador. That's how it was, at least. The fields are filled with flowers, harvest of petaled fire, yearning towards the sun, but who will pick them now, long past their best? They raise no revenue, their purpose gone, their meaning lost. There's panic in the streets, and who needs flowers now the hospitals cannot contain the dead? There's only grief to guide the times. No wreath, no ritual, but from the distant hills a white wind blows, the grace of flowers and the scent of rose. So as much as grief was fueling me, I think rage was also fueling me. Sonnet 38, the 29th of April 2020. Boris Johnson and fiancée announce birth of son. BBC News. The Independent said, it is believed that the Prime Minister has 7 children. However, he has not officially confirmed the exact number. Well, I think it must be 8 now. No, it's still 7, isn't it? She had another one since then? Don't know. Okay. So this one, is not for persons of a delicate disposition, as if any of them actually were. Any farm would welcome him, potent and exact, with his ejaculate. A specimen who cares not what he's spent in spunk, nor where it went, he'll mate with any willing hen he finds on heat, comes on repeat. He's prone to populate whole dynasties with his tenacious seed, foul breeding stock, explosive, indiscreet. Today's tricky. Handily, he's on retreat minding the chick, not the affairs of state. Tip-top excuse for missing the debate. In lieu of leader, we must contemplate this total cock who postures, struts, and whines inside the hen house, ducking question time. So, just a couple more cheery sonnets to finish off. Oh, God. So this is Sonnet 61 from the 22nd of May 2020. Weekly tribute to coronavirus key workers as UK gathers again to clap for our carers. Should we or should we not? Our little isle is quietly divided. Thursday nights, most gather at their windows, British style, and let the carers know they care. However trite and sticky we may feel with awkward spoon on saucepan, making noises seems to matter somehow, somewhere. but to whom? Here's to rainbows, hearts and clappers, centenarians who do their laps, nurses and their freebie Krispy Kremes, to fireworks, death-defying cheesy thanks, morale. Let's find a way to keep the dream. I daren't mention circuses or bread. Surely we'd spot that kind of scam. And yet... so I'll just read the last one, which is Sonnet 100. I didn't expect to get to 100. I must say that when I started writing this book, and I can't tell you how relieved I was, because I sort of got to 50 and I thought I could stop here. Maybe I'll carry on a bit longer. And then I got to 75 and I thought, surely I can get to 100. So I did, by the skin of my teeth. So on the 30th of June 2020, BBC News says COVID-19 death toll passes 500,000 worldwide. The Guardian says cannibal rats are among the grimmest consequences of the upending of urban life. And Katy Perry says, just because it's over doesn't mean it's really over. My loves, this is my last. I tip my hat, I scrawl a wild hurrah, I lightly trip into the red beyond. Stiff upper lip, relief, day of the dirt, day of the rats who eat their own. The rising numbers crack their own facade. The sonnet slowly sips its morning tea and speaks. Let's call it quits, to hell with poetry. Bring on the maniacs. There will be greater griefs. The leading man is muck and splutter, and he has no plan. The virus finds its host. The wars go on, the markets rise and fall, the earth is spent. I hold the sonnet close, my faithful friend, and hear it sigh. Damn, it says, we are not done. Thank you.
I don't mind really, wherever you're most comfortable. Just to, as you may have guessed, we're having a short Q&A session now. So if anybody has any questions, or can think of some questions quickly, based on the reading and the discussion we've had, the floor is open. I'm going to start actually, but I need to sit down first, so this is a bit awkward.
You're like a presenter on the One Show where they have to walk and talk, or one of those news reporters that they put in the middle of a hurricane for no apparent reason, just to see the hurricane go in. Yeah.
They like have those crazy segues on the One Show where it's like from the saddest thing you can imagine to like now kittens or whatever it is. I don't know. It's very yeah. So I've got some questions. Thank you first of all of you for your poems. That was fantastic. I feel like I need some time to process it all, actually. But it was great. I wanted to ask about media, because your poems all use media in different ways and respond to it: radio, TV, headlines, social media as well. And I was wondering how that kind of featured in the writing process in terms of form and content, if that makes sense. Does anyone feel keen to answer first?
I'd be interested in
Okay. I would say that, lockdown, what do? You look at the news a lot. And so I was responding very directly to what was in front of me, and sometimes without much thought. So I would kind of grab the first thing that I saw and just use it as something to write about, which is very useful to think about if you're not sure what you want to write. just find a headline or find a line from the newspaper and just go with it, because the good thing about writing a poem a day is you don't have time to think about, is this a worthy subject for poetry? Because you just have to get on with the first thing. Well, you would know that from your experience at Glastonbury. 2 poems a day. Amazing.
Yeah, well, and I'm just remembering that the reason that I was in Hull in 2009 for Michael Jackson's death was because I'd instituted, bizarrely, this thing called Write a Poem About the News Day. And it was a bit of a joke because, you have National Plum Day. It's Elvis Presley on the toilet day. And I was like, can you have a Write Poems About the News Day? And I instituted that, and people got into it, and it was on the news, and people really did write poems about the news. And so you're reminding me of that, the news as a source. But for me recently, I've actually been trying to avoid the news, and therefore writing poems about the news has been more problematic because, if not. So I made myself write some poems from life so as not to have news involved.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those sonnets and that book because of that, like how you respond to it. It's really interesting, because whether you, because I respond a lot to that, to new stuff, but it's about how much I put my opinion on them. Some of the sonnets put your opinion on it. It was you speaking, like that Boris one was well bullshit, like, and I was like, when I was trying to write this one, I was like, oh, I'll speak to that quote, but I'll try to sit on a fence and show things wider. So it's quite interesting, that sort of like those 2 ways of attacking a quote or whatever. But yeah, I love using media stuff because I feel like all of us are constantly harassed by it. So it becomes like most of my references are to a video I saw on TikTok, especially recently. And that's just part of the process now, I guess.
Thank you. And kind of, well, unless anyone in the audience has a question, I should. Oh, okay. Do you want to? Can you? Susie first. I think that's a really good question. I'm going to repeat it just because we're filming this as well. So it was, how do you lean into things that are chaotic and horrible and difficult feelings, and how do you kind of look after yourself as well in that? Sorry if I've changed your question. I didn't. And how you how you look after yourself in that.
Can I answer this first, because I have the microphone in my hand, and also I had an answer, and also there was a poem I didn't read, and I was going to say something that answered that question. Recently, I have found the world and the news to be so chaotic and so annoyingly nonsenseful, and feeling like everything's been said. I'm not writing topical poems or news poems or anything. There's almost a refusal at the moment. But then for today, I made myself write one, and then I forgot to do it. And this is an example of what I used to do to make sense of the chaos, which was just essentially to bash 2 ideas together in a humorous juxtaposition and end up with a punchline. And for me, it now feels a dissatisfying thing to do. It doesn't have any of the voicey power and authority, I think, of what you do with your sonnets. It just reinforces, in the way that a lot of humour does, the fact that we can laugh at it and it's fine, but it's not really fine. So I'm going to say this is a failure, but this is what I used to do. So I mashed together Doctor Who and the Prime Minister chaos thing. Topical poems for Radio 4. a weekly squib for my local paper column. I don't do them anymore. Summarising the world in a pithy rhyme, order from chaos, a point in time, a pun, a complaint, a left-of-centre punchline. This week, I might have said the Prime Minister had regenerated in a shock twist, hoping for a better script, new stories, no more blonde bob, sharper coat, back to a bloke, same old Tories, a red box, a blue box, old enemies rising, events moving fast, robotic speeches, brutal exterminations, an out-of-control journey back to the past. It does something, but I think it just reinforces nothingness.
Well, I think you're being a bit unkind to yourself, but we're not going to talk about that now. I guess I'm always a person who is unable to, I can't shut the door. I can't turn the page. I find it really difficult. I was brought up in a household, where it was a religion to watch the 6 o'clock news, and then it would be discussed over dinner. And there was always a feeling, especially from the women in my family, that the world is our responsibility. And so for me, the writing is actually a way of processing all that stuff. So it is not just sitting inside me. So I suppose that is it's a different angle on the question that you asked, but I think I couldn't survive without doing it. Yeah.
I had loads of therapy, basically, to process the sort of movement through the project and stuff. And I think even though I'm still trying to work out how to share the poems to communicate this, but even in the face of like extreme violence and terror on TV and on social media, like the fact that I got to speak to those people and research it properly, it brought out the humane in those situations. So even though there was a lot of terrible things, when I was taking it to my therapist, I was having so much empathy for situations that other people were in, who I judged at the beginning of the project as being, it's fair to say, beneath me. But as the project went on, I realized that when we talk about we are all one, like people say that, but really the best and the worst parts are all part of us, I believe. So it's just about accepting that and accepting the world how it is. But like Jacqueline, I don't like to turn away either. That's a really good question, though. Thank you.
It's a really good question. Someone else had a question.
Yes, this is addressed to, I hope I got your name right, Arij Manuelpillai?
Yeah, exactly. That was really good.
I think obviously you agree with me, you're taking a terrible risk actually learning about these horrors. And I would never dare do it. Boy, that sort of horror, like the tank, it's just awful. I just wondered, when you were talking to people, did you ever come across anybody who had profound regrets for what they had done? I mean, I remember listening to a Chinese man who'd been alive at the time of the Mao Cultural Revolution, and he'd thrown somebody who was who had something wrong with them off the top of a building, and he couldn't get rid of it. It was completely. He lived it night and day. What the horror of what he'd done. Did you come across anybody like that? I'd be quite surprised if you had. Wouldn't the boat talk?
No, a lot of people we came across, especially if they had made the change, regretted acts that they had done. In a similar way to people who had been to Syria, but when they came back, and same in Sri Lanka, they'd done acts which were just atrocious acts at the time, but they were within that bubble of war, and the bar of what's acceptable just gets lower and lower in those situations. And even if we think about the Second World War or wars going on in Russia and Ukraine, when at the beginning it's shocking to see the Russian plane go down. But as it goes on, people get more accepted. But I think once they finish and they come out the other side and they're like, I did that. Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of shame like that drives us. Yeah, exactly. And PTSD is like really, it's not something that's been researched across the board. It's mostly about war-torn places, but there's all types of people carrying PTSD with them, and it's not from one massive thing that happened, it's from repeated things that happen. So yeah, I think probably the majority of people carried a level of regret, for sure. My uncle carried loads of regret with him. And even when he ran, finally he had to run away to get away from it. In that time was when he really faced up to it all and had a major breakdown because of it. But yeah. That's so astute and complex. I mean, yeah, I think partly I write poems because instead of taking a character from A to B, you can drop them straight in on B. Yeah, and then also they have the power to change the air in a way that a short story or novel doesn't. So I wanted that intensity. But I also have come to this realization, I think both of you will probably agree, it's like the metaphor is two things. They're completely different from each other. Like Kate was saying, they smash together and all of us are like, wow, they're actually quite similar. And that concept of taking like someone from over here and someone from over there and then showing how those two things can be a metaphor for each other or they find a bridge was at the crux of the whole idea. And that's why I didn't think of radical empathy, but everywhere I went, people were talking that as a term, that the poems, I wanted them to be sat on the fence and looking at both sides at equal measures, which I don't think it worked all the time, but I wanted it to be like that when I set out. I wonder what you think.
Oh, so many things are going through my head at the moment. One is the Yeats quote where he says, out of the quarrel with others we make rhetoric and out of the quarrel with ourselves we make poetry. And I always believed that, but I'm not quite sure that I believe it so strongly anymore. But I do think, and again, this is something we touched on in the workshop earlier, that there is something about poetry that means that you often experience it before you understand it, or else you don't even ever understand it, but you do experience it. And I think that is a quality that is fairly unique to poetry in the sense that it is as much about the music and the sound as it is about the actual ideas or what is being said. And because of that, I think it's like a sort of, if you'll excuse the image, a kind of power bomb of sense. And I think along with it, it carries feeling. I've worked with scientists, and there's one particular scientist I've worked with called Robin Lamble at Imperial College, who is also a performance poet. And they say that that often scientists can more easily get in touch with the importance of what they're doing through poetry in a way that they can't get in touch with it through science. And we're talking about climate scientists here, that it can really reach parts of you that other forms of literature, whether they're whether they're fiction or non-fiction, can't reach. So that is one of many things that I could say about the power of poetry. But I could probably go on for about 3 hours, so I shall stop now.
There's a dredging of the subconscious, and not just of the subconscious of the writer, but of the subconscious of society, in a way possibly that non-poetry or other genres can't quite do, perhaps.
Yeah.
I love that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and it uses the mind of the reader as much as it uses the mind of the writer. So in all that white space and all that metaphor, you're really invited in to be yourself in the poem, aren't you?
And I think in the pandemic, there was a really practical reason. Lots of people found their attention span was reduced and poems fitted that shorter attention span. So it felt like poetry was having a pandemic moment. I mean, I didn't care at the time because I didn't care about poetry or poetry world or being a poet at all whatsoever at the time. But retrospectively, hurrah. Also, I was going to say, you said, well, why would you write poetry? Why that form? A very non-mystical reason. If you're a poet, you'll write poetry, won't you? If I was a joiner, I would have built a cabinet. Go on. If, yeah. Absolutely. But as I say, if you are a poet, you'll write a poem. If you're a joiner, you'll write a cabinet. You use what you have to hand, don't you? So if you're that thing, you do it. Just do it, don't you? I could have. Yeah.
I think there's something about feelings and facts as well. You can argue with the fact. You can ask someone, I don't know. And I feel like poetry gives you not just information, but feelings. And that, I think it's Jory Graham said, help it be felt as a mission for the poet. So you're giving it, I don't know, you're giving someone not just information, but also an experience. That's a great question. Thank you all for questions, but that was our last one. Was that right? Yeah. We have to finish, but there are books for sale. No, it's fine. The music's starting any minute. There are books for sale. Please come back. I didn't mean to sound quite so desperate there, but we've got another event at 4:30, and the theme of that is waterways. So it's all about rivers and canals and seas and fish and swimming and eels and good stuff. And this evening there is When I Think of My Body. That's at 7, and that's all about politicisation of women's bodies, and that'll be very interesting as well. We'll have some good chats. So, goodbye.